To help companies here adapt to new tariffs, the Singapore government will launch a new business grant in October with support measures for workers over a longer period of uncertainty and volatility. Nadira Zaidi again tells us more.
Since April, the Singapore Economic Resilience Task Force has engaged over 3,000 stakeholders, including business leaders, unionists and new graduates. And the responses have been varied, with some firms taking a wait-and-see approach, holding back investments or reviewing their plans.
There is a high level of recognition that things could continue to, a downtrend. And therefore, there is also the recognition that the best thing we can do for ourselves is to be very prepared, whether in terms of adjusting our business plans or in terms of thinking how to expand opportunities job-wise.
To help these businesses tide through trying times, a new grant will be launched in October this year. The Business Adaptation Grant will be offered to firms over a period of 2 years, and this measure will support companies to offset costs like trade and legal compliance advisories or even reconfiguration costs. Manpower Minister and Minister in charge of Energy and Science and Technology, Dr. Tan See Leng, says the grant is capped at $100,000 and more will be allocated to SMEs.
This is meant to provide a large part of it advisory services, and subsequently to, if some of the moves are more permanent, to eventually help facilitate that diversification, whether it is in supply chain, whether it's in logistics. Now, 2 years, given that we also expect that, that over the next couple of months with the letters being issued out, there may still be changes across the different market geographies.
As for concerns from fresh graduates and job seekers on the employment outlook, Dr. Tan says entry-level job openings remain stable. He points to opportunities in emerging sectors like the green economy and the care industry. NTUC Secretary-General Ng Chee Meng also urged job seekers to remain flexible when exploring career paths.
The labour markets remains resilient today. There are job opportunities for our young workers. So we do encourage our young workers, our youth, to keep an open mind. Consider all the different possibilities and the job offers available. Even when they may not feel that the job checks every box, but these jobs can open the first doors to experience, networks and potentially new directions at a very young age.
To support workers amid ongoing uncertainty, the government and NTUC E2Y are expanding access to career guidance services. Meanwhile, 2,400 jobs are available in the public sector for fresh graduates in fields like engineering and software development.
Well, Singapore's apex business Jamus says that while tariffs have put a chill on investments, proposed measures could help firms realign operations and stay competitive.
This 100,000 grant is not meant to underwrite a full supply chain relocation, but it's enough to start. And what is it enough to start with? Is to start that process, to engage experts, to provide businesses with advisories on FTA and trade compliance, on legal and contract matters, as well as supply chain optimization and market diversification.
Well, the Singapore National Employers Federation adds that the onus to future-proof careers is on both employees and employers. Well, some of its efforts include counselling services and helping employers redesign jobs.
So make sure they're not just focused on the immediate uncertainties, but also have an eye for long-term. Other than the tariff situation, employers also have to contend with disruption brought about by AI, possible supply chain disruptions. So keeping ahead of the curve and always thinking about what's next is important for employers.
And these developments coming off the back of months of negotiations. Let's take a look at the timeline of events. In April, US President Donald Trump announced global tariffs with a baseline of 10% across all imports. Or 6 days later, Singapore set up a new task force to help businesses and workers tide through the situation. Then President Trump pushed back the start date of reciprocal tariffs by 90 days. From April until May, Deputy Prime Minister Gan Kim-yong at one point took time off campaigning for the general election to address this issue, adding that Singapore is in talks with the United States. When July came around, Mr. Trump announced that higher duties will begin on the 1st of August. Letters were sent to 14 nations indicating tariffs of 25 to 40%. And just 2 days back, Mr. Trump announced plans for new tariffs on semiconductors and pharmaceuticals. Now, to discuss this further, we have Professor Lawrence Loh. He's Director, Center for Governance and Sustainability from the NUS Business School. Thanks so much for coming in this evening, Professor Loh.
Thank you.
An obvious question. So we've got 10% for now baseline tariffs and threats, and in place sectoral tariffs from the Trump administration. What are the chances of our negotiating even below 10%? Or if we get that letter giving us higher than 10%, any chance of bringing that back down at least to 10%?
I think, first of all, you can see we are actually hitting a moving target. I think countries, businesses are all caught in the bind. They actually don't know what to do because President Trump can, at any whims of fancy, change the tariff rates or even change the time frame. So with this setting, it's quite difficult for a country, say, including Singapore, to actually pull up a very coherent front in the negotiation. So getting the deal done is one thing. It will be subject to changes. So actually, we are actually hoping for the best. But having said that, I think Singapore stands in a very strong position because, say, for example, in ASEAN, Singapore is the only country where the US has a trade surplus. So with that, I think the bargaining power of the country, even how small we are, actually gets elevated.
But, well, we are still deciphering what Mr. Trump has in mind when he imposes these tariffs. So trade imbalance is one of the factors. And we've seen him hit out at, for example, BRICS nations, other countries, accusing them of un-American sentiment. So it could be he feels you're aligning too much with China. We don't know, Singapore, where we might offend the US leader. Apart from trade imbalances, we hope for the best, but we are prepared for the worst.
Yes, definitely. I think trade is perhaps the excuse for Trump to actually encounter all the other countries, trying to strike deals. But actually, behind the US administration is a geopolitical fundamental of trying to maintain control of the entire world. I think trade is the best weapon, not only a weapon of diplomacy, but a weapon of strategic interest, because the US market is just too big. It is something that countries cannot afford to lose. So they have to bend backwards and go with the flow, with the whims and fancies of the US.
Given that you are clear-eyed about this, and I'm sure our government recognizes this as well, that the irreplaceability of the US market, is there anything we can do, given that, as you say, we are trying to hit a moving target?
I think, of course, US, even though it's very large, it's not the only market. Even if a country lose the US market, it's not the end of the world. And I think what is happening is many countries are now de-risking, trying to spread all the exposure. So in other words, they are doing trade optimization, cultivating new markets. So in other words, intra-region trade within Asia, within ASEAN is going to be the mainstay. And this, in some way, in the longer run, might be a very good, I would say, substitute for the US market.
All right. Earlier, in fact, on our earlier bulletin, we were speaking to an analyst who said she puts the figure intra-ASEAN trade at 22%.
Yep.
And of course, within the European Union, it's, I think, around just above 50%. So we have a ways to go yet.
Yep.
But there are very real difficulties.
Yep.
I mean, it's easy to say, let's beef up, bolster intra-regional trade. But there's a reason why it has not happened. It's not just because we're very different as countries, 10 countries across ASEAN.
Yes. I think precisely because it is low now, there's potential for growth. I think within the pact like ASEAN, there are many ways in which country can soften, can smoothen, the trade flow within each other because now there's a common threat, which is the US. So I would say every country will see that it is in their self-interest to even give and take a little bit with their neighboring countries.
But with each one of us negotiating our own trade deals with the US in a bit of a zero-sum game, because let's face it, if I've got 10%, you have 25%, and he has 40%, I stand to gain.
Yes, definitely, it's each country to their interest. But basically, because this is also due to the fact that every country trade profile with the US is very different. For example, in ASEAN itself, the US has the highest deficit, say with Vietnam. In fact, for Singapore, we are the only country where the US actually has a surplus with the 10 ASEAN countries. So this diversity actually does not promote a coherent or even united stance towards the US. So therefore, countries will now say that perhaps we should see where we can patch up certain differences among ourselves and then see we can trade off some of the differences among ourselves for the collective long-term repeated interests of the region.
All right, I'll pick up on this long term. I think earlier in this bulletin, you were watching the reports and the sound bites as well from our Deputy Prime Minister. We're not just looking at a one-off. This is a new era. It's a new trade environment. This is here to stay, at least for a good while yet. It's not just, we've got a business grant. This launches in October. But it has to go beyond just helping someone survive for 6 months to 12 months of slower growth. Do you see efforts to make that happen? We need to change. This is not the same world.
I think we got to start somewhere. And I think the existing grant given to businesses, whether they are SME, small business, enterprise, or whether they are large companies, is a good, I would say, initiator. But of course, we know that tariff will persist. It is something that will last, I would say, even beyond the current US presidential administration. In fact, not even before Trump, there's already a lot of tariff because the factors of production operate differently in different regions. The comparative advantages between different economies are something that are persistent. So therefore, the prices of the goods of production definitely differ, and that gives a certain inherent differences between countries. As long as these differences persist, and these are things that will last in the long run. So tariff will be here to actually negate some of these differences between countries' endowment and their efficiency.
All right, so apart from financial aid, and this is a final question. We had a hint of that earlier from one of the earlier interviews as well. Businesses, I mean, we spend all day here in the newsroom trying to make sense of all the different announcements coming out of Washington. For a business which does not have the time, and it's not its job to make sense of these announcements, can we do more to make them understand or translate it into something they can understand for their business? Final question.
Definitely, I think state governments, including the Singapore government, will be in a good position to provide the guidance, given that now DPM Gan himself and the delegation will be there for some, I would say, sensitive negotiations. There will be certain insights that could be translated, I would say, indirectly into policies or into schemes that can help businesses to preempt what is to come without breaking some of the confidentiality.
All right. Preempting is very hard to do in these very volatile times. Thanks so much for coming in this evening. Professor Lawrence Loh from NUS Business School.
Thank you.